South Africa. I'm still processing all the experiences that I made. I just got back from South Africa a couple of days ago, currently on the island of Zanzibar. And today I want to share with you my 5 biggest culture shocks. Please keep in mind, the things that shocked me might not shock you at all. We all, when we travel, carry different cultural lenses. For me, it's from the perspective of an Ethiopian Eritrean who was raised in Germany. So it's important to make this clear. These are my experiences. Without any delay, let's dive in. My name is Weyni. Welcome to my channel Plan B Back to Africa. If you're new here, welcome, karibu, and salam salam. On this channel, I share my experiences of traveling the African continent together with my 2 children. Right now we are on the beautiful island of Zanzibar in Tanzania, and we've been traveling full-time for almost 6 months now. And I also share my knowledge about doing business on the continent, and I'm looking for attractive places to settle for the African diaspora because I was born and raised in the West and I'm tired. I'm out. So if you're interested in these topics, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so that you are always up to date. Now let's dive straight into today's topic, my 5 biggest culture shocks in South Africa. Culture shock number 1. For the first time in my life, I saw white homeless people on the continent. I thought my eyes are playing a trick on me. When I left the airport of Johannesburg, I saw 3-4 white people begging people for money, and I was like, what's going on here? Because don't get me wrong, this is a big shock to me because I've traveled many countries on the continent, and my experience from Ethiopia, for instance, or Nairobi is that whenever you see white people, they are the ones who are not struggling, who are doing well, you know? But in South Africa, for the first time, I saw white homeless people sleeping in tents. And this was an image, it couldn't get into my head. And then I always had to remind myself, okay, this so-called rainbow nation has a lot of white South African citizens, right? And of course, not everyone can be successful. But the contrast is so extreme comparing to other African countries where white people usually have the best jobs, are highly skilled professionals, they make a lot of money. And so coming to South Africa and seeing a white person knocking on my window in my Uber and asking me for money, I was like, indeed, what is... I was like, this can't be real. This can't be real. This was an image I had to get used to and that I saw throughout my journey, especially in Johannesburg. In Cape Town, not so much, but there were parts in Cape Town. In one of our Airbnbs, for instance, opposite of that house, there was a white lady sleeping in a tent, and every morning when I left the house, I was like, this is unbelievable. This is unbelievable. Anyway, let's get to culture shock number 2. And this is something, I don't even know if you can call it a culture shock. It was just a big shock to me because we rented a car and we drove from Johannesburg to Cape Town. And on my journey from Johannesburg to Cape Town, I saw like all this uninhabited land. As far as your eyes can see, there is so much land. The country is so beautiful, but so much space. And every time when I drove through these vast landscapes, and I also took another road trip later from Cape Town to Windhoek in Namibia, same scenario, you drive for hours like no man's land. You don't see a single house, you don't see people. And then I had to think about this narrative that Africa is overpopulated. And I'm like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. This continent is not overpopulated. Maybe this continent is overexploited. Like, we all know that a lot of land is still in the hands of foreign investors, right? But from what I've seen, there is so much space for everyone. There's so much land. So ain't nobody gonna tell me and convince me that our continent is overpopulated. Anyways, that was my second shock or realization that I made during my journey in South Africa. My biggest culture shock, actually, shock number 3, was when I visited a whites-only separatist town called Orania. So you might ask yourself, what did you even do there? So as a cultural anthropologist, I'm always interested in identities, in heritage, and I found out about this community of Afrikaners who are the descendants of French, German, and Dutch settlers who arrived in South Africa in the 17th century. And in 1991, they established this city called Orania. It's more like a town, a farm, a big farm. And so they have established this whites only, or let me say Afrikaners only town in the middle of South Africa, on the African continent. And again, this is coming from my own perspective, with my own cultural lens. As an Ethiopian, if you don't know the history of Ethiopia, it's a country that has never been colonized. This is unthinkable. This is unthinkable. I mean, foreigners cannot even own land without going into a joint ventureship with a local partner. And then seeing a community, right now they have 4,000 residents. If you want to know more about Orania, I have 2 YouTube episodes on that. I will link them at the end of this video. You should definitely check them out. This was just like outrageous. And to see that this is possible on the African continent. I think what is so painful about Orania is to see that apartheid, in a sense, still exists. And I think that is what was especially shocking to me and also painful to see, you know, because these people, obviously, they haven't learned from history. And I'm sorry, I listened to the people, I listened to their arguments. I read so many comments under the video of people who were trying to justify the existence of Orania. Nothing can convince me that a place like Orania should exist in South Africa. I had a very interesting conversation with a tour guide in the District 6 Museum in Cape Town, where I learned a lot about apartheid. So District 6, just to give you some background info, is a big neighborhood in Cape Town, and the apartheid regime forcefully evicted and displaced more than 40,000 colored and black and Indian Arab people from this area to make it a whites-only area. And the tour guide was a resident of District 6 before also him and his family got displaced, forcefully displaced. And I asked him, as I did so many people during my stay in South Africa, what is your opinion about Orania? How do you feel about this? And he said, look, it's like this. We allowed them to have this place because we believe in democracy, and in this democracy we say you have the right to associate or disassociate, and these people chose to dissociate themselves. And the reason why we allow them to have their Afrikaners only, whites only town is because we want to show them we are better than you. Because when these people were in power, they violated every single human right. Not just that, they committed crimes against humanity. And so now we want to show them we are better than you, right? It's private property, so they can basically decide who qualifies to buy land and who resides there. But yeah, I'm still very, very concerned because we saw how this can end, right? Anyways, this was, I think, one, if not the biggest culture shock for me. And so with that being said, let's get to culture shock number 4, which has to do with Ethiopia as well. I am from the Tigray region, and there was a devastating war, a genocidal war from 2020 to 2022, which costed more than 600,000 people's lives. Some people speak of even higher numbers, like 800,000 to up to 1 million people's lives that were lost during these 2 years alone. And even now the country is still at war. People are suffering there, are being killed. Like I think there's almost no region that is at peace right now. But you know what is so interesting? Whenever I talk with people in South Africa, of course they are curious, they want to know where I'm from and what brings me to South Africa. And what also brings me to South Africa is the fact that I had to leave Ethiopia, my home country, due to the war, and decided to travel and look for alternative places to settle, When I tell them about the war and the genocide in Tigray, they are shocked. They tell me they've never heard about that. And what is even the most interesting part about it is that the peace deal between the Ethiopian government and the leaders of my region was signed in South Africa, in Pretoria, and yet nobody knows about what's going on in Ethiopia. But best believe me, they know very well what's going on in Ukraine in the war against Russia. They know, of course, about what's going on in Palestine and the genocide that Israel is committing. They know about all the wars, but they don't know what is going on the African continent. And I must admit, and it's actually sad, but this is not an exception for South Africa. Same scenario in Namibia, in Zimbabwe. People know about what's going on in Europe, in Asia, but they don't know what's going on in Africa, that there is a genocidal war in Sudan. In comparison, they are so well informed about the war between Russia and Ukraine or Israel, you name it. One Uber driver, he was really shocked when I told him, listen, almost 1 million people died, and you mean to tell me you have never heard about that? And he told me, Weyni, I swear, I always watch international news. I read local newspapers. I've never heard about the war in Ethiopia, and I feel that that's sad. We should be more aware about what's going on in our neighboring countries, because like this, I don't know, it's sad. Anyway, let's get to the last culture shock number 5. And again, this also comes from the perspective of an Ethiopian. I was in South Africa during the elections in end of May, and before I arrived in South Africa, I spent quite some time there, more than 2 months, and I said to myself, okay, before the elections, a week before the elections, I need to get out, because when shit hits the fan, who knows, like you just have to be safe. Then I started asking people. They said, oh no, we don't have no issues, we have no violence during elections. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, hell no, who knows? And they told me, like, we might have a lot of crime in this country, but the elections have always been peaceful. And so after asking so many people, I decided, okay, I'm gonna stay. And it was so peaceful during the day of the elections. I went out. There were so many activities going on. It was basically like a public holiday. People were relaxed, eating ice cream outside. I talked to so many people. Did you vote? And they even told me, like most of the people told me they didn't vote because they don't believe that their vote will change anything. Everyone seemed to be very frustrated and upset with the current government, ANC, which I can totally understand, right? They've been in power for 30 years and the country is not doing well. All the load shedding, high crime rate, high rate of unemployment, you name it. But I was amazed by the fact that people spoke freely and openly about what they think about the government, and those who voted shared with me openly who they voted for. When it comes to Ethiopia, let me tell you something. Before the elections, we would go shopping for 2 weeks, just in case you cannot leave the house for 2 weeks, because this was the scenario in the past elections. There was so much violence, so many people got killed. It was just dangerous to be out in the streets, that when there was the elections last time, people were like stacking up food, doing groceries for a month, just in case they cannot leave the house. And so I was so impressed, and it showed me that South Africa is really a democratic state, and even how the ANC later on dealt with the huge loss of votes. They lost so many votes. Now they basically are forced to go into coalition. They cannot rule the country on their own anymore. And the way that they accepted the results of the elections was really something that made me happy to see that this is still possible on the African continent. And it showed me that other African countries can and should learn from South Africa. It's a beautiful country. I enjoyed my stay there. I can recommend to anyone to visit this country. I'm honestly considering of moving to Cape Town and settling there. South Africa is probably the most beautiful country on the continent. I wish I could have stayed there longer, but I know I will be back for sure. These were my 5 biggest cultural shocks from my journey through South Africa. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. And I see you in the next video. Bye!